And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our platform where we are slowly but surely draining the swamp in Louisiana, advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism, and bringing to the forefront the voice of conservative candidates across Louisiana. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you are having a wonderful week so far. We are continuing the endorsement series today. And again, just a reminder, we know that only a few of these interviews pertain directly to your voting decisions, but please keep listening. We'd love for you to share these episodes with friends and family members who live in the districts and the areas that these pertain to. So please do that. We, as a reminder, have audio clips on YouTube and Rumble that are just short little snacks for them to be able to digest, hopefully, if they're not big political people, but it'll give them a taste of the candidates that we are talking to. Today, we will continue the endorsement series with a true public servant. Jason Amato is running for state rep in District 81. But before we introduce you to Jason, let me get into the scripture of the day. It is Psalm chapter 89, verses 13 through 15, and it says, "Breathtaking and awesome is your power. Astounding and unbelievable is your might and strength when it goes on display. Your glorious throne rests on a foundation of righteousness and just verdicts. Grace and truth are attendants who go before you. O Lord, how blessed are the people who know the triumphant shout, for they walk in the radiance of your presence." And I have to say, the Lord has been continually and faithfully reminding me these last few weeks not to give in to distractions and frustrations, but to keep my eyes on Him. And the best way to do that is just to get into a mindset of gratitude and worship, because when our mind and our heart are meditating on how big God is and how much He has done, it gets really difficult to be worried about the future. So this passage says that the foundation of His throne is righteousness and justice. So how will those not prevail? Righteousness and justice have to prevail. And verse 14 says that grace and truth go before Him. And I really think that these are the days that we're walking in, days of grace and truth, where the fight for truth, the hunger for truth, and the demand for truth is really gaining ground. And that's a sign that the Lord is near. So be encouraged. We're not walking through this alone. He's walking with us. He's fighting alongside of us for the cause of truth.
And grace and truth are walking with us, and we are blessed to walk in the radiance of the Lord. That is such an important reminder today, especially during campaigns when things can get very heated and things can get very ugly, to keep our eyes focused on grace and on truth. And from what I hear, Danielle, speaking of someone who is walking in truth and getting his message out for the citizens down in Livingston and St. James and Ascension Parish, is our guest this morning, Jason Amato, who is running for House District 81 out there. Jason, it's a pleasure to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Hey, good morning, Danielle. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for letting me join you and speak with you today. It is a glorious day. I tell you, when you think about the foundation that the good Lord has placed upon us, righteousness and justice. And thank you, Danielle, for going to Psalms. Often when people are troubled, and even when you think about King David and all, how he wrote the Psalms, it's no more applicable than these days and times. We got to stay focused on the prize of the Lord and continue moving forward with it. So thank you for allowing me to be here this morning.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional background. I know you've been a public servant for a long time. Just give us some insight into the work that you've been up to leading up to today.
Sure. Thank you. Hey, just a little bit about me. So Jason Amato, as mentioned, running for state representative in District 81. My wife, Nancy, and I have been married for 35 years and 2 daughters. Our oldest daughter, Randy, married a wonderful young man, Wyatt, from Livingston Parish. And 3 months ago, they blessed us with our first grandchild, Colt Allen. So it's great. Everything people said about, thank you, about being grandparents is true. I actually had a quick story. I had a chance to babysit him the other day for a couple of hours, and Nancy was going to deliver homebound communion, and she's like giving me a list. Okay, he needs to be fed. Boom, boom, boom. I said, I got it. She no sooner backed out the driveway, and Randy's calling me Dad. I'm at work, but if you need me to come home, I said, I got it, man. No worries. Sure enough. I fed cold. I burped him, a little while later. I changed his diaper and all, and he fell asleep in my arms. And, it was amazing holding our grandson in my arms. And I'm thinking to myself, how can anybody not respect life? I mean, it was just a tremendous moment, and I thank God for allowing me to have that and all. And Nancy came home about an hour later. I handed off coat to him and all. I had a meeting to go to, and about a half an hour in the meeting, I get a text from Nancy. She says, hey, any chance you changed Cole's diaper? And I said, yeah, sure did. Yeah, he had a wet diaper. She said, you put his new diaper on backwards. It's like, what?
Oh. Nobody's perfect.
We all made
the
it out
baptism
okay.
by fire.
Exactly. But it's been good. And then our younger daughter, Rainey, she's in her final year of law school at LSU. So we're excited about her completing her journey, and she wants to go out in the world and do good. She's actually wants to get in government herself and around policy and procedures and all, which we need smart people helping guide us on those activities too. So we're excited for her. And a little bit more about myself. Just retired from Shell and Geismar after 35 years. Shell is a wonderful company to work for. Tremendous opportunities for me in my career. Been all around the world. Tell everybody I've been to a couple of Shell sites where their accents were worse than mine. The way it helped me really, though, is that my job as production excellence manager always to go where there were problems and work with really smart people to really get crystal clear on what is the problem, develop a solution, and most importantly, implement that solution. Too often times in government, you hear where there's a problem and they study it and just talk about it on end, and the problem never gets resolved. And for me, 23 years of elected service in St. James Parish, I've learned that if you don't fix that problem, well, tomorrow's a new day with a new problem. And because you didn't fix the problem from yesterday, now you got two problems, and it just continues to grow. So that skill allowed me to really be effective, not only with Shell, great career with Shell, thank them for that, but in elected service for St. James Parish. First 7 years as an alderman in the town of Lutcher, and the last 16 as a parish councilman. People ask me, people ask me all the time, how do you like being in politics, Jason? And I usually give them two answers. First one, when Lutcher, LSU, and the Saints are winning, is great because everybody's happy. But look, trust me, in my 23 years, there was a couple seasons where they wasn't winning, and I started getting calls about drainage, potholes, and stray dogs.
The problems are always exacerbated when the Saints are losing. But
exactly.
But let me ask you this, Jason. Speaking of, you've been in public service for 20. By the way, congratulations on your grandbaby. There is nothing that brings home the value and the sacredness of life than having your grandchild, and also, at least in my experience, nothing that motivates us to try to leave them a better state than knowing that, look, they're going to be inheriting something. And what they inherit will depend largely on what we do now. And so I think it's so gratifying that you've made a decision to run for the state legislature. But as you said a few minutes ago, you've been involved in public service for 23 years. You've been making a difference for that long. And I don't know that we've had any guest on the show who's been involved in public service for that long. What would you say right now, Jason, as you survey the field, look at the state, look at the district out there in Livingston, St. James, and Ascension, some of the problems that concern you, and what do you hope to do to be able to address those problems as a legislator?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. And I think that you used the key word a while ago. It's motivation. When you look at some of the things going on in our state right now, and it's amazing as I'm going around District 81, which, as you mentioned, is a portion of St. James Parish, portion of Ascension, and greater portion, 52% of Southern Livingston Parish. The needs are all the same, right? Insurance, flood protection, roads and bridges, education, and crime, as you go in that order. That's everybody that as I'm talking to and as I'm seeing, and even on the parish council, as we're working to try to improve the quality of lives here in St. James Parish, that's the key topics that we have to get right first. And then from there, then you can move on to others. But until we get that straight, Danielle and I were talking a few minutes before we went live, just last week, we got some young neighbors that live across the street from us they just finally moved back into their home from Hurricane Ida, and they've been beset with insurance issues and one thing after another. And even as I ride through District 81, there's still blue tarps everywhere. You can still see people trying to manage their lives in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. So we do have to get that straight.
And that was how long ago was Hurricane Ida now? We're
2 years.
2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that in the state of Texas or in the state of Florida or in other states, there would probably be very few homes that still had blue tarps on the top of their houses 2 years after a hurricane. That is such a reflection, in my view, of the state that our state is in, quite frankly, and really the lack of responsiveness on the part of our leaders to assist people in times of real distress. Speaking of times of distress, Jason, I'm sure you recall well the 2020 lockdowns in the state of Louisiana, the emergency COVID protocols that were put in place across Louisiana that caused so much suffering and so much pain to Louisiana citizens. Well, we're hearing now that there may be another lockdown coming, at least to some degree or another COVID strain rearing its ugly head. What are your thoughts on that? And what would be your response, both personally and legislatively, if that were to come down again?
Sure. I can remember as we was going through that lockdown and all, thinking to myself, are we really doing this? And now in hindsight, you look at it and it's like, how did we allow all of that to happen? To me, when you look at some of the things that they allowed to remain open, and then we closed our churches, our schools, and so many others, the impacts are still being felt today. And so as you look at the national news now and all, and just what you said, now they're talking about possibly another COVID lockdown. I'm thinking, it's no way. It's a way for government to control people, and that's plain and simple with a power grab. And we cannot allow that to happen again. There's even like just yesterday, since our qualification period has closed and all, I've been getting a number of surveys from different groups and all. I received one yesterday. It was from a children's group about vaccines, and it was saying, lamenting really how the vaccines of children has really dropped. And I was telling them it's because of COVID. I don't trust COVID. And now, because growing up, we knew these certain immunizations had to take place for your children to go to school and all. But because now the lack of trust, that's the result of the COVID pandemic and all, I can see why parents are really reconsidering what their children should be injected with, even though the smallpox and other have proved safe through the years. There's an element of mistrust now, and we got to work to rebuild that. But walking into another lockdown will not help that situation at all. And we are smarter than that, and cannot let that happen. Cannot at any level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think parents are right, exactly as you said, to be reticent because, I mean, really, it's not the government's place to tell us what to put in our bodies, whether it's related to COVID or anything else.
Correct. I agree with that.
And so that has been one of the big concerns that we've had. I'm so happy to hear that you say that you will resist that. In response to LeCag's candidate survey, you clearly indicated that you would stand against any efforts to lock us down again. And the reason why it's a concern is because back in 2020, Jason, when there were conservative legislators circulating a petition to revoke the governor's emergency lockdown, Representative Alan Seaball was unable to he got fairly close. He got pretty close to it, to getting the required number of petitions to revoke the governor's emergency pandemic. But due to too many rhinos in our legislature who would not stand up and would not assert themselves on behalf of the citizens, he was unsuccessful in getting this state reopened. And that's why it's such an important issue for us. If you were elected and anything like that were to come down, that you would stand for the citizens and make sure that we don't have to go through anything like that again.
Most definitely correct.
What about your race more specifically? How are things looking out there? What kind of reception are you getting? And what does it look like from here on out, 30 days to Election Day?
Really, my wife and I have really enjoyed this campaign. I was telling Danielle earlier, she's tolerated me being in politics for 23 years, but she'll admit even that she's been enjoying this campaign. The people in District 81 have really been so warm and open to us as we've been going throughout the district. And pretty much, you look at my calendar, from here on out, every day and evening is somewhere. But it's given me the opportunity to really meet some wonderful people, hear their concerns and all. I do feel we have momentum on our side, Chris. Working for Shell, there's a number of Shell employees and all who live throughout District 81 Both Nancy and I come from large families who have family members living throughout District 81. So for me, it's just continue to meet people everywhere I can, explain to them who I am, my experience, and what I think are the main issues facing us in this upcoming year. And again, letting them know that as a parish councilman, I've been effective in improving the quality of lives in St. James Parish. And I want to do that, take that same success, the courage, the hard work, and the religious convictions to Baton Rouge and do well there.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Is there any particular area, any particular demographic that you're focused on now? I mean, it's parts of 3 parishes here. It sounds to me like a substantial part of Livingston Parish, as you said. You're resonating pretty well in Livingston, it sounds like.
Yes, it's going well. It's amazing the number of people, say, in Livingston that know people that we know in Ascension or St. James Parish, people know people in Livingston. If you go to Livingston Parish, there's some beautiful rivers and, of course, Lake Maurepas. So there's residents that have camps that down that way and all. And it's really a lot of interconnectivity. I tell everybody, between the residents, the roads, and the rivers, we're connected in so many ways across District 81 that it's a blessing to be able to campaign with them. And I hope with God's blessing, represent them in Baton Rouge.
Jason, has anything surprised you on the campaign trail? What are some things that, maybe caught you off guard, either pleasantly or unpleasantly?
So I think it's all been pleasant. It's been a very positive experience for me. Really, when you think about the district, and again, with Livingston Parish, if you understand politics and all, 52%, you would think, okay, there's an opportunity for a candidate in Livingston Parish to take this state representative seat and all. Yet there was no one from that area that joined the race. There was a couple of them thinking about joining, had conversations with them and all, and they recognized my talent, my skills and experience, and really got behind me in support. So I'm appreciative of that. But for me to come from Lutcher with my Lutchanese accent and to go into Livingston Parish, and they've really been open to me, and it's been a joy. I can't think of other than, I don't know if I've had any unpleasant experiences, which is why also Nancy's having so much fun. You hear about now, and in fact, if you turn on the TV with the governor's race, these next 3 weeks, I call that the silly season, because it's going this is where you start seeing the campaign commercials, and a lot of them are having to go negative now. And I never did believe in negative politics. I run on who I am. And, at the end of the day, I got to be able to look myself in the mirror, but also the good Lord tells us, preach the gospel everywhere you go, and only when you have to use words. So my actions and all really have to be representative of the Catholic faith that I love and I'm a part of. So I take that every day and move forward.
That's such a great expression. Preach the gospel often, speak only when necessary. That's really, really powerful. Let me ask you about a particular issue that I think has been concerning Livingston voters, the Lake Maurepas stuff, and this carbon capture. There was some legislation this past session, Jason, that would have repealed in Louisiana this right of private corporations to essentially seize private property in order to construct these carbon capture pipelines and bury them underground on people's property. And I know the outcry in Livingston Parish in particular over that has been quite remarkable. Apart from your view on carbon capture per se, what is your position on the idea that a private corporation would be able to seize private property for purposes of carbon capture?
Yes. So for me, Chris, 35 years at Shell, one of the last projects I was asked to provide input on was a carbon capture project. And also I understand the process and all. When Representative Wheat and others were trying to pass legislation about the carbon capture project in Lake Maurepas and all, I was in the state capitol with them. And here's what I told a couple of them. In Louisiana, not too sure anybody recognizes there's 57 named lakes. And in government, you're always going to be careful you're not setting a precedent when you vote on something. And so if we're going to allow carbon capture in Lake Maurepas, then that's telling me we're setting a precedent that it's also good in Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Brune, False River Lake, Cypress Lake, and all throughout. And so we need to really be careful with that. Here's the other thing. So in St. James Parish, again, on my experience, we have a company, Nucor Steel. They just signed a deal with Exxon. Exxon's going to build a pipeline for carbon capture from Convent all the way to Vermilion Bay, Vermilion Parish, where Exxon has property that's not used for anything else, and all that makes sense. Doing carbon capture in Lake Marpole, I still don't understand the logic behind that. And I think we need to continue to perform studies and really do our due diligence to make sure what are we about to do. Are you protecting the environment by ruining the environment? That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And speaking of what you just alluded to, the idea that what may be appropriate for one parish may not be appropriate for another, there was some legislation that Representative Sherman Mack brought this past session that would simply allow each local governing municipality to make a determination about whether or not the voters want carbon capture in their parish. We supported that legislation. It returned the authority to make these decisions to local governing authorities, which is where it should be, in our view. And unfortunately, because of some rhinos on the State Natural Resources Committee, that legislation was defeated. But it seems to us, Jason, that that was an appropriate way to resolve the issue, to allow each parish to make a determination for themselves about whether or not they want carbon capture and about whether or not they want their land used for this.
Yeah, correct. I'm Chris. I'm a product of local government. And through the years, we've made decisions that benefited the residents. And sometimes it was approvals and sometimes we voted no because we have a land use plan in St. James Parish. We understand and know what our residents want and don't want. Perfect example, right now, we have a solar farm company wanting to take 4,600 acres of sugarcane, which we are a large sugarcane producing parish, out of production and put a solar farm. I passed a moratorium because we do not have a solar farm ordinance or anything that regulates solar farms. And once you let one in, like I talked about, once you set that precedent, it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And also, we have a moratorium. We in the process of developing a ordinance to guide us in solar farms. And I was at the state capitol when Representative Mack introduced his bill and had his hearing and all. I thought he had value in his, and similar to Representative Wheat and a couple others, but they just could not get it out of committee. And then even though Representative Wheat's bill made it out of committee, it got pounded when they went before the full legislature, which is unfortunate. I think the local governments understand and have a better relationship with their residents on what they want, what they don't want. For example, Livingston Parish, they're dealing with developments right now. I would not want the state of Louisiana trying to tell Livingston Parish residents what they can do with subdivisions and development. It's not their decision.
Exactly. It's not appropriate.
100% agreed on that. Yeah, no question about it. This is an issue that, again, people have talked to us about very, very often, voters out in Livingston Parish and other places for that matter. It's like, why won't they pass legislation that just allows us to make these determinations based on the vote of the local citizenry? And as a constitutional conservative, that is just very consistent with the way I believe generally. I think that the best government is always the most local.
Exactly.
Because it is closest to the people. And I think it's really the way our founding fathers envisioned it.
Yeah. And Jason, you've been in public service for a long time. You mentioned your 23 years serving locally. What are some things that you have done locally that you think have prepared you for this position? Because I've seen an article where you worked on the Louisiana Transportation Authority, working to improve state roads, which is desperately needed. And I'm sure you've got a lot of experience through that. You've worked as a volunteer fireman. Just tell us a little bit about some of the things, maybe some of the issues that you've worked on that would inform your role as a legislator.
Sure. So I really do enjoy serving our residents. The second part of that question, when they ask me how I like being in politics, the second thing I tell them is there's a lot of satisfaction helping people. There's a lot of frustration trying to help people because government is government. And so for me, based again on my skills that I've gained from Shell around solution development and causal reasoning and all, it's really allowed me to see a problem, develop a solution, and implement a solution. Oftentimes, St. James Parish, we're sandwiched between Ascension Parish, St. John, and all, and they're bigger than us and they get the projects. But for me, I've been able to partner through the years. You ride down Interstate 10, the cable barriers, St. James Parish. I had the first project to do a 6-mile pilot program for the cable barriers on the interstate in St. James Parish. And that was through my experience as electric fire chief. We would respond to wrecks and accidents on the interstate. And a lot of times, it on the interstate, there's some fatalities and all involved. I did the project work for that, got that approved. From there, at the federal level, worked on projects at the state level, a number of things. We just, coming out of the 2016 flood, we sandbagged for a week in St. James Parish. And thankfully, we saved everybody's houses. But St. James Parish and our residents realized sandbagging is not a long-term solution. So I developed the St. James Parish Flood Protection Task Force, and now we're on the way toward realizing levee protection on the east bank of St. James Parish. Our biggest threat is backwater flooding from Blind River. And so we've seen it, and to not do anything is really just a failure on our part. So we're moving forward with that. We received funding, and we're working with the government now to continue to move forward, helping them understand the urgency of the project. So one other thing I was pretty proud of in St. James Parish, in fact, you hear all the candidates in the next couple of weeks really talk about early voting. We got to help people early vote because the election day, it's just so many things going on that day. Huh? It's LSU, football, other things, soccer, you name it. And so for me, early voting is the key. And in St. James Parish, we had 2 early voting sites, one on the West Bank and the other one was up River Road in Convent, which is, to me, you take River Road and all, and it was just inconvenient. So I worked with the Secretary of State's office and all, and we have an early voting site right here in Lutcher, which is our most populated area on the East Bank. And so now our residents can just come right here in Lutcher, which a lot of them already are, run in, vote, and leave. And it's so convenient. So I'm proud of that fact because I received pushback from some that said, no, we don't need that. St. James Parish is small enough. 2 is enough. And I said, if we're trying to get people to early vote and make it easy for them to vote, we got to make it convenient and all. And this early voting site in Lutcher meets all that criteria. And this is our 3rd election now where we'll have early voting in Lutcher, and the residents are really utilizing that. So again, it's looking at every aspect. And the list is even long, of course, in 23 years, what I've been able to do. But, those are some of the highlights that I'm really proud of.
One of the issues that you mentioned a minute ago, Jason, is the same issue that Representative Valerie Hodges mentioned when we had her on our show, which is flood protection. She said that is a massive concern out in your area. And it sounds to me like you've actually done things to enhance your levee protection and your flood protection.
Yes, we have, so by assembling a task force, that made it real. And we actually put the steps in place now to move forward with it. We're recognized by both the state and the federal government. And they, early on, and it's a shame that a lot of times the measurement of a disaster is how many homes are destroyed or residents are displaced. And for us in St. James Parish, because we did a tremendous effort of sandbagging after the 2016 flood, and we didn't have that many insurance claims and all. And of course, when you look at the poor people that were impacted in Livingston and Ascension Parish, it just dwarfed everything. And that was the focus of attention and all. So they really, and deservingly so, received the funds and had the conversations about flood protection. We felt we was getting left behind because typically our flood threat is 3 or 4 days after Livingston Parish and Ascension Parish due to just the dynamics of backwater flooding. But now that we're on, they recognize we have the same threats as everyone else. You hear about the West Shore levee project coming through St. John Parish, and it stopped at the border of St. John, St. James Parish, which water doesn't recognize borders. So now we're funneling in even more water from Lake Maurepas, Lake Pontchartrain into what's called the Blind River Basin, which is the northern side of St. James Parish, the east bank of St. James Parish. So significant progress there. And again, I think our parish president and the council, we all united on making sure that our legislators have the understand the attention and the priority of St. James Parish, in addition to Livingston Parish and Ascension Parish. It's a threat in Southeast Louisiana, and we need to move forward with it sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And you have been, it sounds to me, moving forward on it and doing a lot of very significant things. I'm going to ask you one last question here, and then I'm going to let Danielle close us out here. This is a general and a broad question. One of the biggest frustrations, Jason, that our listeners have and that I know voters across Louisiana have is that they vote for candidates and put candidates in office based upon promises that they make, representations that they make that are very pleasing and obviously very acceptable to the voter. And then very often after they get elected and they start serving office, they start becoming influenced by corruption or the desire to self-enrich or the desire to please big special interests, and they become very different people and they begin to govern in a way that's very different from the ideals and values that they ran on. And it happens frequently, and we've seen it. So my question to you is, what assurance, if you talk to our listeners now and to your voters, can you give that the Jason Amato that exists now with the ideals and the vision that you have is not going to become a different Jason Amato after you're elected and after you begin to serve?
Sure. So for me, one, I have 23 years of a proven record that shows that my actions and my votes and all are consistent in that aspect there. I think this is a generational election, and going back to the word you used early on around motivation, I'm motivated because I consider myself a generational leader. And in fact, on our St. James Parish Council, I am the senior council member on our council, 7 council members and all. And in the past, there have been times where I knew there was tough votes going in, whether we had to approve something or vote no against something. And that's tough sometimes, but in those situations, I've asked to be the first vote. That way, if it needs to be a no vote, by me voting no first, it helps lead the others to have the confidence and the courage to make that tough vote also. And I see no different going to the state capitol. I've been looking, for Livingston Parish, there'll be 4 new state representatives, 2 new state senators. I've been on the campaign trail meeting all of them, and they all have tremendous talent and skills. And also, for me, my ability to work with others. But again, going back to my skills I've gained from Shell with causal reasoning and solution development, able to help them understand, okay, let's walk through this process. Let's walk through carbon capture, why we need to really put a pause on it and understand further what the regrets can be, or what's the pros, the cons, and everything. So for me, going to Baton Rouge, it's just an extension of the work I've done in St. James Parish, wanting to reach out to the other residents in District 81 in Ascension and Southern Livingston, but then also doing great work in Baton Rouge for the state as a whole.
Yeah. I know I said that was the last one, but that jogged me on one more. And so, Danielle, forgive me for this, but this is important. As I listen to you speak, Jason, it occurs to me that perhaps one of the things that distinguishes you from your opponent in this race is that you actually have experience governing policy. You have experience making policy that affects citizens across a district, where you have to come together, you have to reach agreement, and you have to establish policy for the good of the citizens. Whereas your opponent, as a former law enforcement officer, perhaps does not have that scope of experience.
Yeah, that's correct, Chris. And look, a lot of respect for former Sheriff Wiley. Him and I have known each other for a number of years and all that. But for me, as I'm going through District 81, people ask me that question, hey, what's the difference between you and your opponent and all? And while he talks about doing something, I've done it before. I've recognized where there was a policy or a lack of policy that was impacting our residents, improved it. With the land use ordinance is example one. The one we're working on right now with the solar farm ordinance, which when finished, Chris, this solar farm ordinance will be the gold standard that other parishes will want to use. There's probably 9, 10 parishes right now really grappling with solar farms, and nobody has a good plan. And so we're moving forward with that. So I'm able to see that ahead of time when there's a problem and go to work and close it, manage budgets, work with people, local level, state level, federal level. And for me, that's the experience that I'm bringing to District 81 and to the state capitol.
Yeah, because we don't have a whole lot of time. I'm emphasizing this because we really don't have a whole lot of time for on-the-job training. We're in a critical crisis, really, for the soul and the welfare of our state. And we need people in there who can go in and understand how policy comes about, who understand policy and understand what you have to do to be able to pass legislation for the betterment of our citizens, and not just vote for certain things, but actually initiate certain things and be a leader on certain issues that really matter. And the 23 years of experience that you've had in actually making policy, I think is an invaluable asset that you have.
Yeah, it's true. Quick story. Last week I was at a function in Baton Rouge, and there was a couple other individuals running for state representative in districts out in the Baton Rouge area, and there was a question asked to one of the gentlemen. They asked him what would be his first bill that he would introduce. And he started talking about it and all. And I'm thinking, as he's talking through what he wants to do, I'm thinking, okay, I know it's the first bill I'm voting against. And that's key also, just like you talked about, is not only knowing when to vote for something, but just like we talked about earlier with the lockdown, knowing when to vote against. You got to have that courage and the experience to be able to say, no, that's not the right thing. At the end of the day, if it's not benefiting our residents, then it's a no vote. And as long as we continue to understand who we work for, who's our constituents, what are the needs of the state, and move forward with that. It really clears up a lot of confusion about whether you should vote for something or not.
Indeed, it does.
I love that, Jason. I really appreciate the fact that you have stood up, that you've heard the call or answered the call to run. I think that Livingston Parish and Ascension and St. James will be very well served should you get into office. So we're cheering for you. We are backing you. Where are some ways people can get in touch with you, or how can people learn more about you?
Sure. Yeah. So my website, jasonamatostaterep.com. And of course, as everybody else, I'm on Facebook, Jason Amato for State Representative. And also, I always give out my cell number, 225-268-6902. I tell everybody, hey, I'm 24/7 as a former Letcher Fire Chief who was always on call. And that's a practice I always adopted also as a parish councilman. Call me. I'm coming to you, and let's understand what the problem is. How do you need help? And let's make your life better.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's such a pleasure.
It is. You keep up the good work out there. Work hard. You know, the last 30 days or so are the most critical. I know you're probably out there meeting people and talking with people every day. How about your door-to-door campaigning?
It's been going well. Thankfully, we probably about a month ago, it was hot, and it was funny as I'm going door to door and all. And I got to be honest, some people wasn't coming outside, which I don't blame them. Yeah, it was hot and they're in air conditioning, but those that came out were open to me, and I kept it short. Gave them a card, introduced myself, and said, "Get back in air conditioning, and if you got any questions, call me." But
there you go. Get out of the heat.
Oh yeah, the good thing about District 81, there's just so many events and all that's always going on every weekend at least. So to allow me the opportunity to meet people, whether it's at church or fundraiser opportunities, charity events, it's been going well there too.
Well, good luck for the rest of the campaign. We're praying for a good result for you, and we look forward to having you back on at some point. God bless you, Jason.
Thank you. God bless y'all. Thank you. And we all know prayers work. So thank you for your prayers.
You bet.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Jason.
Thank y'all. Have a blessed day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Chris, you can just feel his love for his constituents. I was just so struck by that. You can just tell that he totally has a servant's heart.
You know who he kind of reminds me of? I mean, we've had 60 episodes and countless guests on our show. He reminds me of a Tim Kerner. His outlook, he obviously has a heart for service, willing to get down on the level of the citizens, to work with them, to help relieve their suffering. He just reminds me a lot of Tim Kerner. I was very, very impressed with him. And I think he's got a good chance here. I really do, particularly in light of the fact that he's been in public service for so long and many of the things that he's been able to do during that period of time. And I think that it really, as much as I like former Sheriff Jeff Wiley, I think he's a good man. I think what Jason brings to the table that Jeff does not is the fact that he has served in a position where he's charged with making tough decisions on a district-wide basis that directly affect policy decisions that directly affect the citizens. And I think he knows how to do it. I think he knows that process. And I think that he will be able to get into the legislature and become effective as a leader quite quickly.
Yeah, you know what he said that really impressed me was that as he was going and, letting people know that he was running, when other people were considering running and they realized that he was, they said, you know what, I think you do a great job. You go ahead and run and we'll support you. I think that just speaks volumes about his character, about the way people view him in his district. And I just think that that's hopefully going to take him the distance. I really also love that he talked about not only being solution oriented, but the implementation of things. And I think he's exactly spot on. That's exactly where government falls down. They think they have the solution for everything, but then getting it across the finish line is where it always seems to fall apart.
Yes. And I think both his training with Shell as a problem solver, which he did for many years, he had to address and solve very serious problems while he was working with Shell, coupled with his experience in the public sphere, where, again, as I said a minute ago, he had to make policy determinations that affect citizens. I just think he's uniquely qualified to serve. And I want to encourage Danielle, as our listeners know, the LeCag PAC is doing all we can to provide resources and assistance to constitutional conservative candidates who are running for office across the state. So I want to encourage our listeners to continue to donate to LeCag, LACAG.org, or you can send a check to LeCag PAC, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70896. And every dime donated is used to assist and advance good conservatives for office, because we have got to return our legislature to the citizens.
We do. And one of the things that Jason said that really, I think, hit home for me was the fact that he was willing to take the hard vote, and he was willing to be the first person to stand up to do so. I think, Chris, this is something that you and I have talked a lot about, that it's even a litmus test for our endorsements. Are the people who are running willing to stand up? Do they have the backbone to stand up when it counts for the people? And I think that Jason absolutely does. So we're looking forward to seeing how his race shakes out. I have high hopes for how it goes. And of course, if listeners would like to continue to support the State of Freedom, you can do so at freedomstate.us, or you can follow us on YouTube, on Rumble, Spotify, podcast with Apple, and pretty much any place that you like listening to podcasts. We should be there. So if you want to give us feedback, we'd also love to hear from you. You can email us at info@freedomstate.us. You can go on our site. There's a comment box there that we'd love to just hear from you. Hear if you have suggestions, if you have ideas for episodes, if there's someone you'd like to hear from, just let us know. We welcome your feedback and can't say enough how much we appreciate your support and listening, and your prayers, and also your financial gifts.
We love getting feedback from our listeners. We absolutely love our listeners. They are the heartbeat of the State of Freedom. No question about it. All the sharing, the subscribing. We encourage businesses to advertise on our show. We have thousands of listeners now across Louisiana in different parishes throughout the state. So advertise on our show. Very few will be able to promote your business, your enterprise, the way Danielle and I will, and we will do it very enthusiastically. Also, continue to share, continue to donate to the State of Freedom, because, Danielle, we are continuing to revolutionize the way political advocacy is done in Louisiana. Jason Amato was able to come on our show and share his vision with thousands and thousands of listeners. And now they will know exactly where he stands, what he believes in, and he'll be able to continue to get his message out. So the State of Freedom platform is essential if we're going to return not only the legislature, but really the government generally to the people, where all power should reside. And if we continue to do this each day, we will continue to broaden our platform, and we will continue to preserve the State of Freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. I'm looking forward to the 14th, Chris.
You and me both.
Have a great one.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.